first list of threats, I don't have a good result of a threat assessment, I'm going to be in trouble, right? And I'm in a pretty big trouble because ultimately if I'm writing detection use cases, laying rules, running ML models, doing whatever, like however you detect, even if I'm hiring somebody to help me and I don't know the threats, it makes my job really hard. And this is, funny enough, a lot fuzzier and a lot harder to comprehend compared to what you and I before I started this effort. And then people show up and argue, and this is a good cocktail conversation, it's too early for that. Some people say, well, actually, threats are all the same compared to my on-premise environment, and then people say, no, all threats are going to be different, it's all about VM escapes, and other things. To me, this is a discussion we'll keep having. I don't think anybody has clarity on this. I go and reread my Verizon Data Breach report. I still don't see clear answer on what threats matter to my cloud environment. So, to me, this kind of has to be solved, and again, we'll give you some advice on how to solve it. Other companies do that, but ultimately, you would need to solve it for your cloud deployments, what threats matter. Yeah, you can say crypto miners, sure, crypto miners matter, great. What else? Longer story. Now this is a funny slide where I make fun of a lot of approaches that people have tried. And I don't want to pile stuff on all of them, but I've encountered too many people who say, I just need to learn how to collect cloud logs. I'm going to get CloudTrail, I'm going to get Cloud Budget logs, I'm going to get all this stuff. I'm going to pile it into a tool called, tool that charges per gigabyte, and I'm going to do frame. Well, would you? The question is, if you don't have the detection context, you don't know the threats, you can collect some of the stuff at enormous expense. Would you be successful? Eventually, maybe. But to me, it's still a very common approach. Even people who come to us, they say, how do I collect all this telemetry? Okay, well, we can help you, but like, why are you collecting all the telemetry? I've seen a lot of hilarity ensue when people say, this cloud stuff's complicated, I'm just going to cut and paste my on-premise detection stack from freaking IDS to like everything I have to the cloud. Every cloud VM is an EDR. I'm going to sniff all the traffic, drop IDS everywhere. I'm going to replicate my 1980s security posture straight into GCP. Great idea. No. Well, I don't want to pile too much on this. It's an idea that people have tried and they've largely survived to tell the tale. The problem is that you're kind of wasting resources and you're kind of achieving cloud outcomes with on-premise means. And sometimes you're not even achieving any outcome. People still do that, and to me, funny enough, if you put it together with this, the last bit, actually for many companies, it's an okay first step, as long as you're not planning to stay there, but you're kind of starting to deploy more cloud-native answers to some of the same questions. A lot of friends I have work for MDRs, there are plenty of MDRs here, and people who encounter this problem, they say, I know how to answer. I'm just going to find the MSSP and I'm going to give them my cloud to monitor. And this MSSP says, oh, you're in the cloud, that's great, we can help you. Or give me the list of your servers. At which point you're like, what? It's the cloud, I don't have the list of my servers. And at this point you kind of know that this is not working too well, and it's taken us 10 seconds to ascertain that. There are a few MDRs that sort of get cloud. I happen to be very particular to Expel and a few others, but it's a very rare competency to take this whole cloud off your hands for DNR purposes. You can find an MDR that will do this, but it's not that common. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this is so 2013, but I still see people who assume that they don't need to do anything because it's just magically done by somebody somewhere else. Now my advice, like this counts as advice a little bit, is actually it's okay to go slowly. If you are doing the migration and you're kind of doing mostly the on-premise practices, mostly on-premise tools, you're okay as long as you know where you go next. This would work fine as long as you never run out of money and you eventually build the use cases too. And if you find the right outsourcing partner, it also may work. So this is a very unscientific. My Gartner overlords would have killed me for being that shallow with insight. But if I have existing tools, some Some of them would be kind of okay, I guess, if you're using mostly infrastructure as a service. You can keep your EDR for now, it would work, right? If you're sniffing traffic and if it's not encrypted and your provider does allow you to, well, get the unencrypted traffic, you're fine. Logs, of course, you can collect as long as you have context and a bunch of other dependencies. But the idea is that this almost gives credence to the idea of copying my stack initially. But the keyword is, again, initial. Some things don't work well. Of course, CASB works well for SaaS. I'm hearing that there are now people launching this whole CDR vendors for cloud detection and response. EDR just for cloud. Do we really need that? I don't know. We'll see. The point is that some of the stuff you have does work. Some of the stuff you have just flat out does not work. You cannot put EDR in a cloud function. Sorry, that's not working. Good news. Funny enough, towards the end, I'll become much more optimistic, and you're going to witness very briefly a very optimistic, positive Anton. So, what do you get out of cloud? You get the tools that are actually scaling much better. You get tools that are kind of priced, in my opinion, more fairly. You get tools that use backend analytics in the cloud. A lot of EDR vendors do make use of cloud backends. Well, it's ours not to do more interesting analysis. You get a lot more structured access to logs. If you're used to syslog and traditional ways to, go through file directives to pick up file logs, you may be surprised that in the cloud things are genuinely better. You call an API, you get a log. You call an API, you get context. So this to me is quite clean. Some detection, including some really magical detection, is going to be done by your cloud provider, like us, like others. Again, Tim's baby, the MTD, is a way to detect certain types of badness in the instances without any action on anybody's behalf. It just magically works because we look at stuff. And to me, as Phil Venables would say, security would over time get better. So if you do nothing, it's very clear that in a year or two your security would improve. Probably not enough for most people, but generally speaking, cloud to me creates this type of a kind of the opposite of a vicious circle. It's like a circle of improvement faster. Now, what can we actually do in practice? Now, if somebody wants to learn one thing from the Prezo and do something practical, it would be this: learn IAM. And when I was a Gartner analyst, I made a lot of fun of IAM because I called our IAM team a password change team. I kind of made a lot of snide remarks about IAM, for which I am very sorry now, because ultimately, if you don't succeed with IAM in the cloud, you won't succeed. So a lot of things are really quite bizarre. I mean, I'm reading the GCP documentation, and if you are not, even if you are an IAM expert, identity expert, you may see some things that aren't clear to you. And if you're a SOC manager, you would see a lot of things that are not clear to you. So to me, investing time in learning one piece of the cloud, if you're doing that, you're doing IAM. You're learning how identity is done in the cloud. Not because your one IAM is taken away from a breach, but because a lot of stuff rides on identity in the cloud. I wanted to go through a few practical recommendations before we close. So, as far as advice, and again, giving advice like learn cloud sounds kind of vague. So to me, the one practical direction, if you are dealing with, if you have a SOC, if you're dealing with cloud environments, you would learn how identity is done. You would learn, because a lot of this would power this alien detection context or different detection context I mentioned. A lot of this is about, oh, you have this account. Oh, it's a service account. Oh, wait a second, what's a service account? Or what about account impersonation? Well, it sounds very 1980s Windows or Linux, but it's completely different in the cloud. A lot of other things would be just flat out built from a different foundation by us, by other cloud providers. So you're doing this so that you can understand a lot of cloud signals. You can collect the logs, but unless you do this, your logs will be kind of obscure and unclear. I suggest we all pay more attention to what threats matter in the cloud. The threat assessment in the cloud is not a carbon copy of your normal threat assessment, but it's also not something completely alien. It's something we do need to kind of understand and analyze for your environment, your cloud usage. There's a lot more work on this is needed by the industry in general. This advice is my normal advice that I've been giving people since, I don't know, 2010 or even before. If you're detecting threats, you want to focus on use cases. You typically cut them in specific consumable chunks, and then you're gonna go one by one. Automation sounds like another cliche, but ultimately cloud as a like a way to do IT is built on a lot of automations. If you're doing detection and response in the cloud, you are not only talking to or connecting to IT automation, you're also doing security in a lot more automated manner. Our second, I think the second or third ever podcast episode was called Cloud Automate or Die. And to me it was interesting that the resistance to automation in many security teams has gradually decreased as they increase cloud usage. So to me there's a lot more going on than just like using SOAR, which of course we wanted to use SOAR because hey, we have SOAR. But the idea is that you will be living in the world where IT around you automates a lot more. So you do want to catch up and likely using SOAR. Well, there's a whole discussion of trust, but you will rely a lot more on the cloud service provider for things. It's not so much about doing shared responsibility, right? It's kind of more about cloud providers do have superpowers that you can't always sort of like replicate in your environment. And in that sense, things like VMTD and a few other threat detection approaches we take are something that would come to you essentially for free or for nominal cost, and it would add value to detection without you doing anything, except for maybe paying a little bit in some cases. Final one is interesting. I don't want to work as an ad for CSPM vendors, but ultimately, just as on premise, before you go heavy on DNR, hunting, you want to get hygiene up. You don't want the proverbial S3 buckets being open all over the place, because ultimately, this is solved through hygiene, through what the whole shift security left, the whole things that aren't exactly inside the SOC. SOC would influence them, but ultimately they're done elsewhere. And it would make your SOC in the cloud experience much better, just like the same activities on-prem do your SOC activities better. That's probably all I had to say. There's a lot of stuff that we've written on this, including the blog post that Tim mentioned and some podcasts, but very much happy to discuss it. Looking forward to future discussions, and I think one more presentation too.
In the booth for a little bit, so if you want to talk one-on-one with one of the industry's leading thinkers, as you know, and then we're also doing demos like all week here, so what's better than a little candid experience with the Google Security Crowd team. And in about 40 minutes, special guest star presenter Robert Herjavec will be here, of Shark Tank fame and cybersecurity fame, so come for that. So Sentry.
I'm very excited.
Can you tell us why?
I love Rob.
Do you know him from the show or from Sideris, where he's the CEO?
The show.
Yeah, that's a lot of people's answer. I'm cool, and I know him from, Hersheybeck or Alexis, Friday nights. That was a lone good memory of that relationship. Everyone remembers watching Shark Tank with an ex. You all would decide whether you're going to invest in something.